Sunday, March 1, 1896. The sun rises over the jagged peaks of the Tigray region in northern Ethiopia. It is St. George's Day. In the cool morning air, a modern European army, equipped with the latest artillery, machine guns, and maps drawn in Rome, marches forward. They are the army of the Kingdom of Italy. They are confident. They are backed by the logic of the Berlin Conference, the arrogance of the Scramble for Africa, and the certainty that a civilized white army cannot lose to an African one. Waiting for them, hidden in the folds of the volcanic landscape, is a force unlike any the world has ever seen. It is a sea of warriors. They come from the Shua highlands, the deserts of the Afar, the mountains of Gojam, and the plains of Oromia. They are led by a king of kings who has turned an internal feudal rivalry into a unified wall of steel. By 12:30 in the afternoon, mere hours later, the impossible will have happened. The European army will be annihilated. The government in Rome will collapse. And the course of black history will change forever. This is not just a story of a battle. It is a story of betrayal, of a mistranslated treaty, of a warrior queen, and of the day the myth of white supremacy suffered its first fatal wound. This is the story of the Battle of Adwa. To understand Adwa, we must understand the world that created it. By the late 19th century, the European scramble for Africa was at its fever pitch. Britain, France, and Germany were slicing up the continent like a cake. But there was a new player at the table: Italy. Italy had only recently unified itself in the 1860s. It was a young nation, desperate for the prestige that came with empire. They were late to the party, and the great territories had already been taken. Italian politicians, led by the ambitious Prime Minister Francesco Crispi, looked toward the Horn of Africa. They saw the Red Sea coast. And beyond the coast, they saw the highlands of Abyssinia, Ethiopia. They believed the climate was healthy, the land fertile, and the people, well, they believed the people were primitive. As one Italian diplomat famously wrote, Ethiopia was a colossus with feet of clay. They believed that if they pushed just a little, the ancient empire would crumble. They started slowly. A shipping company bought the port of Assab. Then, with the tacit approval of the British, who wanted to keep the French out of the Nile Valley, Italy occupied the port of Marsawa in 1885. They began to inch their way inland, up the escarpment, into the cool highlands. But Ethiopia was not an empty map. It was an ancient state with a complex political web. And sitting at the center of that web were two powerful rivals. In the 1880s, the Ethiopian crown was held by Emperor Yohannes IV, a fierce warrior from the Tigray region in the north. But his rule was challenged by the ambitious King Menelik of Shua in the south. The Italians saw this rivalry and their eyes lit up. They adopted a classic Roman strategy: divide et impera, divide and conquer. Count Pietro Antonelli, a smooth-talking Italian diplomat, was sent to Menelik's court. His mission: to seduce the Shua king. He offered Menelik modern weapons, Remington rifles, cannons, and ammunition. The implication was clear: use these to overthrow Emperor Yohannes, and Italy will be your friend. Menelik was a master strategist. He took the weapons, he built up his arsenal, but he was careful. As one historian notes, Menelik was playing a long game. He wanted the crown, yes, but he did not want to sell his country to get it. While Italy courted Menelik, they pushed too hard against Emperor Yohannes in the north. In 1887, the emperor's general, the brilliant Ras Alula, wiped out an Italian column at the Battle of Dogali. It was a shock to Rome, but they didn't learn their lesson. Then, history dealt a strange hand. In 1889, Emperor Yohannes IV was killed in battle, not against the Italians, but against the Mahdiists of Sudan. The path was now clear. Menelik proclaimed himself Emperor Menelik II, King of Kings. The Italians rejoiced. Their man was on the throne. They believed the time had come to cash in their chips. On May 2, 1889, in the town of Wuchalé, Emperor Menelik II signed a treaty of friendship and commerce with Count Antonelli. To Menelik, this was a standard diplomatic treaty. He gave Italy control over territories in the north, what is today Eritrea, in exchange for recognition of his sovereignty and the right to import arms duty-free. But there was a ticking time bomb hidden in the text, Article 17. The Amharic version, which Menelik signed, read, "His Majesty the King of Kings of Ethiopia may, if he so desires, avail himself of the Italian government for any negotiations he may enter into with other powers. May, a choice, a convenience." But the Italian version, which Antonelli sent to Europe, read differently. "His Majesty the King of Kings of Ethiopia consents to avail himself of the government of Italy for all negotiations." Consents, obligata. Why, in the language of international diplomacy, this single word stripped Ethiopia of its independence. Italy notified Britain, Germany, and France that Ethiopia was now an Italian protectorate. Menelik didn't know, not until he tried to write directly to Queen Victoria of England and the German Kaiser. Their replies were polite but cold. "We cannot hear you," they effectively said. "You must speak to us through your master, Italy." The humiliation was absolute. Empress Taytu, Menelik's formidable wife, was incensed. When Count Antonelli returned to the palace to bully them into accepting the protectorate, Taytu famously stepped forward. "We also have our dignity to protect. You wish to have Ethiopia represented before the other powers as your protectorate, but that will never be." Menelik famously wrote, "I have no intention of being an indifferent spectator if the distant powers hold the idea of dividing up Africa." In February 1893, Menelik did the unthinkable. He formally abrogated the Treaty of Wuchalé. He told the Italians, "Ethiopia needs no one but God." To Rome, this was a declaration of war. Prime Minister Crispi in Rome ordered his general, Oreste Baratieri, to advance. "This is not a war," Crispi wrote. "It is a military thesis." He thought one Italian battalion could scare off thousands of Africans. He was wrong. In September 1895, Menelik issued a mobilization proclamation that echoed across the mountains. "Enemies have now come upon us to ruin our country and to change our religion. Today, you who are strong, give me your strength, and you who are weak, help me by prayer." The response was a miracle of unity. For decades, Ethiopia had been torn by regional rivalries. But now, the Oromo cavalry from the south, the Amhara infantry from the center, the Tigrayan rifles from the north, they all answered the call. Even Ras Mengesha of Tigray, the son of the late Emperor Yohannes and Menelik's arch-rival, came to the emperor's camp carrying a stone on his neck in a sign of submission. He said, "I will not help the Italians kill my country." Menelik marched north with over 100,000 troops. 80,000 of them had modern rifles, Fusil-Gras, Remingtons, Mosin Nagants, weapons Menelik had quietly bought from the French and Russians over the last decade. The savages were armed. The first clashes were disasters for Italy. At Amba Alagi, the Ethiopian vanguard crushed a forward Italian column, then came the siege of Mekelle. The Italians were holed up in a fortress. They had guns, but they had a problem. Their water supply was outside the fort. It was Empress Taytu who saw the weakness. She deployed her own soldiers to cut off the water. For 2 weeks, the Italians suffered under the burning sun. Finally, they surrendered. Here, Menelik showed a civility that confused the Europeans. He didn't massacre the prisoners. He gave them mules, he gave them money, he escorted them back to their lines. He wanted to show the world that Ethiopians were Christians, not barbarians. He hoped this act of mercy would lead to peace. But General Baratieri mistook mercy for weakness. He regrouped his army at Adwa. Late February 1896. The two armies are staring at each other. Menelik has the numbers, over 100,000. Baratieri has the position, about 18,000 troops, dug in on high ground. But Menelik is running out of food. A famine is ravaging the land. If Baratieri just waits 1 more week, the Ethiopian army might dissolve from hunger. Menelik knows this, he considers retreating. But in Rome, Prime Minister Crispi is furious. He sends a telegram to Baratieri mocking him for a military wasting disease. He demands a victory. Stung by the insult, Baratieri holds a war council on the night of February 29th. It is a leap year. His 4 generals advise him, attack immediately. We are moments away from the decisive clash at Adwa, a battle that would determine the fate of an entire continent. Documentaries like this, which dive deep into the archives to uncover the truth of African history, take many hours to research and produce. If you are finding value in this story, and if you want to support the preservation of this history, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and click the like button. It tells the algorithm that African history matters, and it helps us bring you more epic narratives like this one. Now, let's return to the mountains of Tigray. Baratieri devises a plan. He will march at night. He will move his 3 brigades into a defensive line on the peaks overlooking the Ethiopian camp. When the sun rises, they will rain fire down on the emperor. But the maps, drawn by Italians who didn't know the terrain, were fatally flawed. In the darkness, the columns became confused. The brigade on the left, led by General Albert I, was supposed to stop at a hill called Kitet Meret. But the map had the wrong hill labeled, confusing it with a distant peak. A simple navigational error, born of arrogance, was about to doom the army. Albert I kept marching and marching. Leading his column were the Eritrean Askaris, native Africans fighting for the Italian flag against their own brothers. Because of the map error, they marched miles ahead of the other 2 columns, isolating themselves deep in the Ethiopian zone. By the time the sun rose on Sunday, March 1st, the Italian army was not a unified line. It was broken into 3 disconnected pieces. And the Ethiopians were awake. It is 6 a.m., Menelik and Taytu are at church for morning prayers. The sound of cannon fire shatters the silence. General Albertone's lost brigade had stumbled directly into the Ethiopian vanguard. The Ethiopian response was, in the words of a historian, like a tidal wave. Negus Tekul Hymenot from Gojam, Ras Makanen from Hara, Ras Mikhail's Oromo cavalry. They slammed into Albertone's isolated brigade. The fighting was brutal. The Italians had artillery, but the Ethiopians had the high ground and the sheer will. By 10 a.m., Albertone's brigade was annihilated. Albert I himself was captured. But the battle wasn't over. The 2nd Italian column, led by General Arimondi, tried to hold the center. But the Ethiopians, using the cover of the ravines and the smoke, flanked them. Empress Taytu, seeing the Italian flank waver, threw her own 5,000 bodyguard troops into the fray. She was seen on the battlefield, veiled, urging the soldiers on. "Courage!" she cried. "Victory is ours." On the right, General de Bourmada was completely cut off. He fought bravely, but he was fighting Ras Aliala, the master tactician. Aliala encircled him. By late afternoon, de Bourmada was dead. General Baratieri, the commander who promised to bring Menelik back in a cage, watched his army disintegrate. He lost control. He sounded the retreat, but it became a rout. In the valleys of Adwa, the myth of European invincibility lay dying in the dust. The scale of the Italian defeat was staggering. Out of 18,000 men, nearly 70% were killed, wounded, or captured. It was the bloodiest battle in the history of colonial Africa. In one single day, Italy lost more soldiers than it had in all its wars of unification combined. But what happened next shocked Europe even more. The European press expected the savages to massacre the prisoners. Instead, Menelik treated the Italian prisoners of war with dignity. He allowed them to keep their personal belongings. He gave the high-ranking officers private tents. When the peace treaty was signed, they were repatriated unharmed. The London Times, which had previously mocked the Ethiopians, now wrote, "The Ethiopians were a civilized power both in the way they made war and in the way they conducted their diplomacy." The Italians, however, did not fare so well at home. When news reached Rome, the government collapsed. Crispi resigned in disgrace. People rioted in the streets shouting "Viva Menelik!" However, Adwa left a complex legacy. Menelik did not chase the Italians into the sea. He stopped at the Mereb River. He allowed Italy to keep their colony in Eritrea. Historians still debate why, Was his army too tired? Did he fear a new, larger Italian invasion? Or did he simply calculate that holding the highlands was enough? This decision would plant the seeds for the future conflicts between Ethiopia and Eritrea, a wound that bleeds to this day. And the humiliation of Adwa would fester in the Italian psyche for 40 years. It would become a rallying cry for Benito Mussolini, who would return in 1935 with poison gas and bombers, desperate to wash away the stain of Adwa with blood before the outbreak of World War II. But the global impact of Adwa was undeniable. While the rest of the continent was falling to the colonial sword, from the Ashanti to the Zulus, Adwa stood as the blinding exception. For the black diaspora, in Harlem, in the Caribbean, in West Africa, Adwa was a beacon of light. It proved that white supremacy was not a law of nature. It gave birth to Ethiopianism. It inspired Marcus Garvey. It inspired Nelson Mandela. It inspired the Pan-African movement. This inspiration was so profound that when new African nations finally won their independence in the 1950s and 60s, many of them, Ghana, Senegal, Mali, adopted Ethiopia's green, yellow, and red tricolor for their own flags, paying eternal homage to the one nation that remained free. Today, Adwa remains the only secular holiday celebrated by all Ethiopians. It is not just a victory of Amhara or Tigray or Oromo. It was a victory of unity. As we look back at 1896, the lesson of Adwa is clear. When divided, the people of Africa are vulnerable. But when they stand together, even the greatest powers of the world cannot break them. This was the Battle of Adwa, the day Africa said no. The story of Adwa is just one chapter in the vast, untold history of this continent. We are committed to bringing these stories out of the archives and onto your screen. If you learned something new today, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a documentary. And we want to hear from you. What other African historical event deserves this kind of deep dive? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching and for keeping history alive.